This is In Step with Compliance, a podcast by the Modern Practice Solutions team for dental professionals.
Welcome to In Step with Compliance. My name is Olivia Wann, and this episode is sponsored by Modern Practice Solutions. In today's discussion with our very own trainers, we're talking about safety data sheet organization and how to optimize how we store them and manage our collection, which can be a daunting task for those of you in dental practices that have so many other responsibilities. During our site visits, we have encountered these voluminous collections of paper safety data sheets. Often, many of them are outdated, or what we call these Frankenbinders, or this Frankenstein collection of papers that are just patched together and maybe it's out of order or it's outdated. So we wanted to get some input from our trainers to give you some ideas on how you can better maintain your practice's safety data sheet collection. So I wanted to start with Brenda. You've worked in dental offices for many, many years. What are your suggestions on collecting safety data sheets?
Thank you, Olivia. First, I would say it's important to start off by having your chemical inventory. That way you have a list from A to Z of the different chemicals that you're going to need to research safety data sheets on. Safety data sheets are only required for products with chemical properties. So powders, liquids, paste, gases, etc. Those that pose potential health risks. So we don't necessarily need to have safety data sheets for products such as gloves or masks or things like that. It's also important to know that if we're using common household items such as super glue, if you're using it in the capacity of office functions, you wouldn't need a safety data sheet for it. However, if you're using it in the lab to secure a denture or a tooth to a denture, then definitely you need to have a safety data sheet for that product. One of the easiest ways to obtain your safety data sheets is to check the product's website or contact their customer service. Be sure to include the full product name and any specific identifiers when requesting documents.
So that could be a task, right, Brenda? I have to make some time for it. And just to reiterate what you were saying, if it's a common household product and we're using it for its intended purpose, then we may not necessarily have to have a safety data sheet. But if we're using it beyond that purpose, we would need to have it. And I always suggest, since you're in the mode of collecting them, just go ahead and collect them. Better to have it and not need it than to not have it and it is considered as being omitted. So let's talk about organizing them alphabetically. Caitlin, I know you served as an OSHA inspector. What thoughts do you have from the perspective of having audited workplaces for safety data sheet compliance? What pearls of wisdom do you have to share?
Yeah, so keep in mind that the whole reason we have a safety data binder is so that in case of emergency, in case of a chemical spill or a chemical exposure, employees can access these safety data sheets to decide how to handle that exposure or handle that spill. So your binder or your online folder is only as useful as it is accessible. Having your safety data sheets organized, for example, in alphabetical order is going to make it much simpler to find these sheets should you need them. Another case where you might need these sheets are if an OSHA inspector asks one of your employees to go find the safety data sheet for a particular chemical. This is the favorite trick or game that an OSHA inspector might like to play is have an employee go grab a safety data sheet for whatever chemical is sitting around. And that employee is going to be expected to be able to find and deliver that safety data sheet within a reasonable amount of time. So having this binder well organized, alphabetically, however you want to do it, although I can't think of a method outside alphabetical that would really make sense here, is going to make your life a lot easier.
Thanks, Caitlin, for those ideas and thoughts. Terri, what can you share with us about highlighting key sections? So, rather than just shoving a safety data sheet in the collection or the binder or putting it in the electronic file, what's your thoughts, especially for the safety coordinator, to do before they file those sheets away?
So one of the recommendations is to highlight the most used sections of the safety data sheet. So your section 2 is going to outline the hazard identification. This is where you're going to find out, is it toxic? Is it going to cause serious eye irritation? And then you might want to highlight section 3, which is what are the chemicals or the ingredient in that product, because that you'll need to coordinate with your chemical inventory list. And number 4, obviously, the first aid measures. This section includes instructions on how you would handle an exposure, whether it be to the skin or the eye, or if someone ingested the product. Section 6 would be what they consider release measures. This is how you dispose of the product. So if you have a hazardous chemical, you cannot just dump it down the drain. You have to process the disposal of that meets the requirements, the EPA requirements, or however they recommend that you dispose of it. And section 8 again is important because that covers what personal protective equipment you need to wear while handling this product. So I would recommend, if you're having a hard copy, to go through and highlight those sections. And if you have a digital copy, maybe you could go in and highlight those sections on your digital copy. Because if you spill a product, you're not going to want to thumb through and read the whole SDS. So that would make it easier to locate the information that you will need.
Yeah, and I'd like to give your explanation a specific example, such as former creosol. And if we look at the former creosol safety data sheet, which is Buckley's former creosol,
Yes.
First of all, with the labeling requirements, it's formaldehyde, and it has, multiple warnings on the safety data sheet that the safety manager needs to be familiar with. And if we look at first aid measures, there's first aid instructions if it gets in your eyes, on your skin, if you inhale it, and if you ingest it. And then going down to section 6 that you were referring to, Terri, it talks about, if there's an accidental release or a spill, it indicates to evacuate the spill area and keep unprotected personnel away. Wear appropriate protective clothing, gloves, eye protection, and respiratory protection is required. So, we would not know that information without familiarizing ourselves with the safety data sheet. So I like that you pointed out, we just don't add it to the collection without reviewing it. Now, I know OSHA requires that we have an index or an inventory. Caitlin, can you speak to that?
Yeah, this kind of goes back to, in a way, accessibility of your safety data sheet. Having an inventory or an index is going to make it easier to access these safety data sheets. It also gives you a quick glance way to see what chemicals are in place at the work site.
And that's probably the hardest part. When we manage safety data sheet collections, it's one thing to get all the sheets compiled, but to actually type out the index or the inventory is the time-consuming part. So that's what makes software applications easier, because you can export the collection to an Excel spreadsheet. So Brenda, what about outdated safety data sheets when you no longer use that product line? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Olivia. And that's something that comes up quite often during our training sessions. When you stop using a product that you have a current safety data sheet for, you are still required to keep that safety data sheet on file. You can archive it into a separate safety data sheet section of your binder. But OSHA does require and mandate that we keep our safety data sheets for 30 years. And that includes products that we are no longer using.
So, one of the things we've noticed when we go on site is that there's a lot of old stuff the dentists may not be using anymore. And they don't want to throw it away because it costs money. But, if it's in the cabinets or in the closet, then we have to maintain the safety data sheets and an updated inventory. So we do suggest that you go through your products and dispose of things properly in accordance with the safety data sheet and really narrow that product line to what you're actually using. So as Brenda mentioned, maybe looking at archiving some of these safety data sheets. You can't throw them away. So we have to know what employees were exposed to. So Terri, what about if someone is interested in maintaining their safety data sheets online where they're not using paper collections, especially for DSOs or multi-site locations? What would be a suggestion that you have?
So if you want to manage your safety data sheets electronically, one recommendation is Patterson Dental has a wonderful SDS management program, and you can actually add products that you don't purchase from Patterson to that inventory. There's also Total SDS. They also offer an SDS collection management system that is a software program, and it creates your chemical inventory. Patterson and Total SDS offer the option of a search engine where you can search for the product you're looking for specifically, and then it will generate that SDS so you have quicker access to it than flipping through a binder with 50 different SDSs in it.
Great. So those are some good points. So in looking at this episode as a whole, we know that this is an important area of compliance. If OSHA randomly audits your office, which we had phone calls last week where inspectors popped in, you need to be prepared. You need to have your safety data sheets in order, whether you maintain paper copies or electronic copies, as well as having your chemical inventories up to date, current. So we appreciate all these great tips from our very own trainers with Modern Practice Solutions, and we look forward to seeing you on another episode.